This is the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast, where divorce coach Corey Shapiro helps you get creative and not reactive in your divorce. Tune in now to get the support you need to make it through this difficult time. Here's your divorce coach, Corey Shapiro.
Welcome to the Getting Divorced podcast. I'm Corey Shapiro. If you're coming to this podcast and you're new to the show and you're new to divorce, my heartfelt sorrow goes to you and your family going through this process. And I hope this podcast and my book I wrote, Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind, helps you just a little bit in the right direction, just a little bit. That's what we're trying to do here. Make just minute changes which may set your sail in the right direction. Like if we're a big boat, maybe 1 degree off could be a very big difference in many years down the road. So let me try to just put you on a little straighter path to a better post-divorce life. So welcome to the show. I'm Corey Shapiro, and I'm a divorce lawyer in New York City. And I do this podcast. I wrote my book to help people with their divorce in a more of a divorce coaching way, not as a divorce lawyer. Every state's different. Every case is a little different, but we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with emotions, and those things don't change. We're also dealing with children, with pets, with property, and those issues are universal. And that's why I do this podcast. In the coaching corner, we're going to talk about the 2 tracks of a divorce. We're going to talk about the outer track, which is that legal track, and we're going to talk about the inner track. That's really what is primarily my motivator here, which is the emotion track. Because if the emotion is 10x, everything's charged. It really can throw things really off course. And the outer track, you're just going to have to learn a little bit that through your attorney and through experience. But I'll try to help you as much as I can. It's just very different and it's very, very unique. So I'll just give you some basic information on that outer track, on that legal track. And we have our question. Also in our topic today, we have a question about custody. So before we jump into our episode, let's start off with our weekly quote. It's from Andy Grove, that great tech pioneer, that great man. And his quote is, "Bad companies are destroyed by crisis. Good companies survive them. Great companies are improved by them." I'm going to twist that around, adjust it for divorce. I'm going to say bad thinking makes divorces difficult, very difficult, and it destroys divorces. Good thinking, you may survive your divorce. That's good thinking. Great thinking, your life may actually be improved with your divorce. So let's shift gears. Let's get right into our coaching corner. And we're going to talk again about these 2 parallel tracks. You got this one track, legal. You got the other track, emotional. What's the legal track? Well, that's what we're talking about. Child support. We're talking about spousal support, property division, finances. Are we looking at all those issues through the prism of the law in your own state or jurisdiction? Or are we thinking about it on emotional grounds? So, for example, child support here in New York, there's a formula. But we could also base it on needs or lifestyle. A lot of different things you can do. Also, if you're on the legal track, you may, and if a case gets that far, or your divorce gets that far and you get into court, you may have to learn about, what is a court conference, learn about more like judges and judges' preferences. You might have to do more extensive disclosure and discovery if you don't know or you're concerned about some waste or your spouse's assets. You might even have to have a deposition. Whew, what does that mean, a deposition? I mean, that's a big word. Lawyers come up with big words, so we could probably charge more. That's probably why they did. Same thing with doctors, I think. But okay, so depositions, you're in generally a conference room. You got to swear in. It's like giving testimony, but you're not in the courtroom generally. And that whatever you said in that deposition is going to be taken down. It could also be videotaped, and it can be used against you at trial. And I think a lot of times now these depositions are the trial, and it could be half day, it could be a day. It's intense for a deposition. And then even if you have just an uncontested divorce, you still have to think about the legal track, especially if you have children. Okay, so that's the legal track. That's the outer track. But let's focus on the second track, the inner track. That's primarily the focus of this podcast. That's the focus of my book. And I think that's a focus to make divorces less difficult, less stressful. That's the emotional track. And the big issue is, first of all, if you don't want this divorce, you're going to be grieving. And it could take years. It could take up to 2 years to grieve. And if your spouse, for example, serves you with divorce papers or tells you they want a divorce and they really want to talk substantively about the divorce within a few weeks or a few months, and you have to hire a lawyer, that could be overwhelming. And a lot of the information you may be receiving in like a conference room or just across the table, it might not be landing because you might be so anxious or angry about what's been going on. And another thing that I find with the emotional track is there's just so many triggers because you have to continue to deal with that person. It kind of reminds me like in high school, if you're dating someone and it didn't really work out, you have to see them all the time. So that's a trigger. Children could be triggers. Let's say you're the primary parent. The other parent just went along with what you wanted. And all of a sudden now you're in a divorce and they are asking for 50-50, where you had to beg them for time beforehand. You're also dealing with really aggressive tactics sometimes by attorneys who are aggressive, who are rude. Today's Friday. I record this podcast on Fridays. A lot of attorneys send these rude emails on Fridays, especially Friday afternoons, just to make your weekend oh so much more pleasant, right? So those are the tracks. So let me just give you 3 things to think about when you're thinking about that outer track, that legal track. 1, you want a trusted advisor. That's an attorney. It's not a transactional relationship, but think of it more of like a therapist, or at least part of a therapist relationship where you really have to trust. A transactional relationship would be like a real estate closing, where it's a one-time deal. This is something that can last a while. So you really want to have a trusted advisor and you want to feel comfortable with them. Okay. The second thing, you have to have a basic understanding of the law. That's key. Just a basic. You don't have to follow the law, but it's good to know what it is. And also it's helpful for these agreements. If you do settle, you have to know what you're giving up. And then you want to familiarize yourself with different types of avenues. Can you do mediation? Can you do collaborative divorce where you're not going to court? Or do you have to go to court? And if you go to court, do you need what's called like a trial attorney? I'm a trial attorney. Or do you need someone who is flexible on their approach and does what's necessary for each specific case? Think of like a prisoner. A trial attorney reminds me like you're in maximal security prison. But maybe you don't need that, or maybe you don't need that yet. And maybe that trial attorney has different agendas than you have. And maybe they see things differently. So do you want a multi-year battle, getting prepared for a trial? And usually these trials settle early on at the trial. And don't think the trial's the end. If you want to continue, you can even take an appeal and you can even come back to court on certain grounds. It's a little bit more limited, but these things can last over a decade if that's what you want. Or maybe you have to rethink your strategy. So the inner track, we talked about the emotional track, and here's 6 steps, which I go over in my book. I'm just going to touch on them briefly. First, you want to monitor your energy. This is it could be a multi-year battle. A lot of people think it's, think of it like tennis. The pros play at the majors, at least the men do, 3 out of 5 sets. Some pros who are so up there, they lose the first set. They may even lose the second set. It's never over until it's over. They may go 5 sets deep, 5 hours plus. That's what they're willing to do. And then if you look at the total points, it might be just a couple points here or there. That's what we're talking about on these contested divorces if they go the distance. I also want you to focus on what you can control. So important. A lot of times when I get clients, they're always focused on the other side. And I think that is the big shift. I'm not focusing on the other side. I'm focusing on what we can control. Another thing, prepare for the long haul. It goes with my energy. Don't everyone thinks it's going to be easy. Think it's going to be hard. If it is easy, great. But prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Okay. Another one is, and this is this might seem a little up in the clouds, but your spouse is still a person, even if they've wronged you, even if they made some bad acts. Probably they're not the worst person in the world. Maybe they are, but they're still a person. And that leads me to another step to think about is upgrading your communication skills, doing this non-defensive communication. And last, I don't know if you're going to master all these steps. This is a practice. I don't even know if I master all these steps all the time, but I'm aware and I keep on practicing them. And you will have a lot of time in a contested divorce to work on these steps. You want to become persuasive. And that's really the key. All of these tactics that the other side is doing, for example, if they serve your divorce papers, if they send you emails, all there are tactics to persuade you with negative consequences. That's right. So if your head's spinning, you're like, wow, I'm tuning out of this podcast. Don't worry. We're going to go through bite by bite each week, each season. We're going to roll through this. So this is your season for your divorce. We're going to go through each step. But if you're like, Corey, I got this. I've been there. I've done this. I just want a refresher. Just give me all the information then you know what? Just check out my book. You go on Amazon. You can read it. And then if you have any questions or anything, just submit a question and hopefully, I can answer it on this podcast. And with questions in mind, let's go to the question. And the question is, what's the best way to manage a divorce to lessen its impact on the children? Not have one? I think that's a little bit of a joke. I actually don't even think that's recommended. I think what they found out that is if you're in a conflict marriage, it's better to get divorced. But you obviously want to really reduce the conflict. And it's hard to do unless both people are on the same page. So let me give you from the best way to the worst way. The best way, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, work together. Okay, that's probably not going to happen if you're listening to this podcast, but that's the best way. Second best way, maybe get a mediator. Because maybe when people are barking, the mediator can hear the unmet needs. Unmet needs. Like, you've never been with the kids. You don't know what they're like. And maybe, and the other side here is only an attack. Maybe the mediator can say, you have a lot of fear, a lot of concerns about their well-being when they're with the father. They're like, yeah, I do. Yeah. So then let's talk about that. Tell us your concerns. Let's list them out. And that's that process. If you're willing to go through that process. Now, not everyone can do mediation. I went to these great mediation trainings and I talked to some of the best, and they admit it's for a certain population. In a lot of states, they're moving to presumptive mediation. That means you have to go, and you could just act in mediation in bad faith. So here's my bad faith mediation. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm just crossing my arms. So the judge is like, the judge made us come here to mediation, and this is what I'm going to do. You just like sit there for an hour and don't say anything. You could do that. Obviously, that's in bad faith. But, in mediation, what's great is nothing happens unless both parties agree. Okay. The next way, if you can't work in the room with the mediator, how about get an expert? Like, I don't agree with you. You don't agree with me. Let's get a parenting expert and defer to them, or someone you both trust. For example, if you have an educational issue, maybe there's a school counselor. If you have a medical issue, maybe the child's doctor or therapist could be that decider. And then the worst way, but sometimes you need it in emergency situations, is to court this stranger in the black robe who doesn't really know you, doesn't know your family, and you don't know the quality of the judge. Some judges are wise judges, And some judges don't even want to be in matrimonial, have no experience in matrimonial, and don't really care. You have to know that going in. So that's where we are in the Coach's Corner. And if you liked that information, you could check out a conversation I recently had on moments of mindfulness with Dr. Zoe Slotoff. A couple times a year, maybe 4 times a year at this point, I've been doing these conversations. I so enjoy it because I love to pick other people's brains. I read a book almost every week, and I love listening to how people who really think about issues explain them in a very clear way. And I trying to get these people who are impactful to me on this podcast to just have these conversations, even if they're not really in the divorce world, but thinking creatively and just talking to them about their skill set. Like Zoe's skill set is being mindful, through breathing practices, through having a mantra. We even do a led meditation, and this might help you. A guided meditation. This might help you just make some shifts in your thinking. So that's what those conversations are for. That's what this podcast is for. So before you go, let me just leave you with this insight. The divorce journey I want you to think of has 3 parts. 3 parts. The first, you're going on a transformational journey from this feeling stuck and resistant to being more open and inspired. And that's a mindset shift. You might need help with this journey through podcasts, through our therapists, through books, through people who inspire you and who can make you feel more positive. That's the first part. The second part is the growth mindset. And I don't want you to think you're going to, read this book, listen to this podcast, and become an expert. I've been doing this over 20 years. This is a practice. And, I said on the recent conversation I had with Zoe, I'm a 1st degree black belt. I am a black belt, but I think Zoe's a 10th degree black belt. And I don't even think Zoe every day is totally mindful. And if you listen to our conversation, she had stressors in her life too. We all do. But can we recover? Can we move forward? Can we learn? That's what this podcast is about. And the growth mindset is, can we just improve 1%, maybe every week, every month, maybe 0.01%? For those people that sounds too much. We're not asking for super changes, but just slight changes over a consecutive period of time. And you will see a major difference. If you don't do all this, what's probably going to happen is you'll probably be stuck in a multi-year divorce at worst, if you're in a contested situation. And then the third thing I want you to think about is proactive living, is getting this post-divorce life, creating this vision that's going to pull you out of this muck, out of this despair you're in. Maybe it's going to let you be a little bit more flexible in your positions, more compromising, because you're playing the long game. So that's what we're thinking about. So yes, it takes time for that transformational journey. Hard to be inspired, but because our thinking is so fixed, but if we have that growth mindset, we're embracing these challenges and changes, things can really move. And that's really what I want from all my listeners and all my clients and anyone really who's going through a difficult divorce. So this is Corey Shapiro. Thank you for your time. Can't wait to reconnect with you again soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast with divorce coach Corey Shapiro. Divorce can be a difficult and overwhelming process, but it doesn't have to be. Corey's book, Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind, is here to help you gain clarity, composure, and a strategic mindset. Get it now as an ebook on Amazon or an audiobook on Audible, and unlock the power of these resources to make more informed decisions and gain better understanding of the process. This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.